very onset of our sports lives, we're told by our parents and our coaches to hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. But do we listen? And when we don't listen, do we pay the price? Hydration is so important to our bodies during exercise, perhaps more important than the exercise itself. Not properly hydrating during athletic competitions or everyday exercising, even walking, can have damaging effects on our bodies. Of course, there are the physical effects, such as fatigue, exhaustion, and heat stroke, but there are also psychological factors that you may not be aware of. Back in 2009, ARS funded a study at the Gene Meyer USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging at Tufts University in Boston. The study was to see if dehydration affected cognitive behavior in addition to physical skills. For this piece, I interviewed Dr. Roger Fielding, Senior Scientist at the Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging.
We know that during heavy exercise, particularly heavy exercise in warm environments, athletes can lose, 2 to 4% of their body weight to dehydration. And in this study, the investigators really asked the question about whether this level of dehydration might have some effects on cognitive function. And this could be important because many people that work in warm environments, or perhaps are military that's really performing maneuvers or functions in warm environments, not only do they have to be physically ready to perform tasks, but they have to be mentally prepared for those tasks as well. So I think this is an important question.
For the study, researchers placed male and female students into two groups. The control group was given water throughout athletics, while the dehydration group was not given fluid during athletics.
What they found was that the individuals that were in the dehydration group actually had symptoms that were associated with negative mood, including fatigue and confusion, compared to the group that was normally hydrated. So one might think that if you're not adequately hydrated when you're exercising, you might develop some symptoms that are more associated with fatigue and confusion than if you're adequately hydrated. And this, I think, has implications for work performance, for sports performance, and most importantly, I think, for military performance, where you have to both be physically and cognitively ready to perform on the battlefield.
To get the full scope of importance of staying hydrated, let's look at what exactly happens to your body when you become dehydrated.
When we perform exercise, one of the byproducts of activating our muscles and participating in running, cycling, even brisk walking, weightlifting, is that as part of some of the metabolic changes that happen to fuel our muscles, there's a lot of heat that is generated. And we have to get rid of the heat that's generated. And the way that we do that is we transmit a lot of that heat to the surface of our skin, and we generate sweat so that we can evaporate the sweat off of our skin and transfer the heat to the external environment. And along with that loss of heat and the generation of sweat, we lose body water and start to develop or move towards a state of becoming dehydrated. That's really proportional to how much exercise we're doing, what the intensity of the exercises that we're doing, and also what the external environment is like that we are exercising in. So for example, on a very cool, dry day when we're exercising, we dissipate heat really well. If we're exercising on a warmer, more humid day, the ability of our bodies to transfer that heat to sweat and evaporate the sweat into the environment is compromised. So that's really why when you exercise, you may start to become dehydrated. That becomes important because human beings live in a very tightly controlled range of body temperatures. So if your body temperature starts to get up above 103, getting close to 104 degrees, you can get into some serious problems with heat illness.
Fielding noted that dehydration doesn't just occur in hot, muggy conditions. In cold and dry climates, particularly at high altitudes, we lose a lot of water in our exposure to the air.
You can get dehydrated in relatively dry environments, particularly at altitude, and also even at sea level if you're not careful about that. We always want to recommend when people are exercising that they really make sure that they're trying to at least replace their fluid losses with water or some type of sports beverage.
Depending on the duration and intensity of activity, our bodies can lose up to 4% or more water. We may not realize we're losing that much water and becoming dehydrated until we start to feel fatigue, exhaustion, even confusion.
I would say most people don't perceive their level of dehydration enough to replace fluids, to completely replace how much they're losing. The thirst mechanism is a little bit delayed and doesn't kick in until you become a little bit more severely dehydrated. So if you wait till you start to get thirsty, it's almost too late to start replacing fluids. So whenever you can push fluids, I think you're better, and really want to make sure that people are adequately rehydrating to the level that they're exercising.
Pre-gaming can be just as important to stay hydrated. And no, I don't mean tailgating with beers and dogs before running a 5K. Limit alcohol intake, caffeine intake, and drink plenty of water. That goes for all ages and demographics, although older people such as myself should be more cognizant of our fluid intake prior to hitting the slopes or running out on the field.
One thing we do know is as people get older, their thirst mechanisms become impaired. So their stimulus to drink fluids is reduced as you get older. Dehydration is a large health issue among many older at-risk individuals. We see this a lot of older people coming into the emergency room with acute dehydration. And it can also be exacerbated by at least some medications that are common among older people, loop diuretics for control of high blood pressure and other things that may influence appetite and cognitive function a little bit so that it can impair appropriate fluid intake.
Sports drinks are a multi-billion-dollar business. Most contain carbohydrates and electrolytes, including sodium and potassium. But are sports drinks really more effective at rehydrating than good old water?
Electrolyte beverage is a little bit better and faster than water. The advantage is that they probably get absorbed slower from the stomach than water, but once they get into the small intestine where you absorb fluid and you absorb other nutrients, their intestinal absorption rates are probably a bit faster. And that's probably because of the carbohydrate and the electrolyte content. Now, does a recreational sort of weekend warrior like me need that? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly, if you are a competitive athlete losing consistently 2-3% of your body weight when you're exercising, those types of sports drinks may be advantageous for you. The other added advantage for those people is that the carbohydrate that's provided in the beverage also is an added energy source that they can benefit from when they're training, when they're recovering from training, and when they're trying to perform. For a serious athlete that's training, their muscles burn a lot of sugar, a lot of glucose. Taking in that glucose in a sports drink is not going to be harmful to their health necessarily, and it's probably going to be a performance advantage for them.
I also wondered whether dehydration could lead to cramping. The World Cup was recently held, and it was common to see some of the best athletes in the world cramping near the end of their games.
I believe that dehydration has a component to cramping. It's probably also some of the fatigue that's occurring because of some of the loss of the metabolic substrates in the muscle, like glycogen and the other carbohydrate stores that we have in our body. The scientific basis for things like cramping, I think, is not as well understood as maybe we think it should be, but I think it is sort of driven to some extent by dehydration, to some extent by some of the energy depletion that occurs after a really long match. It's also not surprising that those things tend to occur more frequently in warmer temperatures as well, so that maybe there's more fluid loss.
What recommendations do you have, let's say, especially for teenagers, young adults, both male and female, as far as avoiding dehydration? What do you recommend they do even days before, then during a competition?
Make sure when you talk about nutrition and think about nutrition, yes, it's carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins and minerals, but also fluid. So don't leave fluid out of that nutrition recipe. Prehydration is important, making sure that you're drinking fluids on a regular basis. And then also when you're training and competing, make sure you consume enough fluid to at least balance your fluid losses.